Well, I got my 2 top shelves marked out. One here, one here. The squiggle mark means no cut. I'm going to rip it on my table saw. I'm going to do the main. I'm going to split it in 2. That piece first, set that aside. I'm going to just eyeball that right there, and then cut the rest of it out. And then we'll just take the balance piece over here. Turns out with this piece, I can save the plywood balance piece for something else. I'll cut the middle shelf out of that and go off to do the next phase. Now I'm actually cutting this on my table saw without using any type of fence, just because the width of the board is the same width as the table, so there's no way to put a fence on it. So I'm actually doing this by eyeball and being slow and careful. If you have a setup where you can go ahead and use your fence, always use your fence to be, keep your cut square, probably quicker. But for me, I had to just do this, just slow and careful. It came out pretty good. Well, here's my main pieces. So let's describe here. Obviously, you saw me cut them out. I have my 2 side shelves. These 2 are going to be higher, both of them. That one's going to be in the middle, which is, like I said, it's going to be underneath. As you can see on both of them, I got cuts like this and like that. but it's not going to be a big deal because I'm going to be routering these edges anyways. I'm going to lose some material in here, so it'll be easier to fix. I'm going to be using Bondo on here anyways. I'll just put some in there, no big deal. And I chose to actually make this side the top just because of these, and I'm going to be removing material, so I have more of these pieces still here as if I did on the other side, and I would have more filling in to do, even though it would be the bottom, but I think this would be the better way. So I'm going to go ahead and router the shelves out first, because the actual top, the desktop, is going to be using a different bit, but it's going to get routed as well, and still giving it more time for the glue to dry. So I want to get set up on that, and we're going to start routering. My dumb forgot to hit record. I routed this part of it already. You didn't get to see it, but you'll see it on the other one. So I'm going to go unclap it, spin this so I can get this side, and this side I'm not worried about the back. I'm going to get set up, go ahead and round the edges on this one. I'm going to round actually both sides, thinking I'm going to round the edges, just bevel it on both sides. So that way at least when the paint flows, it won't just flow and drop, it'll flow, go underneath a little bit and then drop. Time to router the edges. Now we have it all routed. I'm going to go ahead and just do some hand sanding, smooth it down a little bit better, to not make it so rough. Probably even doing the top too. I got some marks from sliding it around. No big deal. Like I said, it's going to get bondoed and more layers of stuff. So that's what's next. Well, all I'm doing here is it's just simple hand sanding. I'm using pretty much an aggressive grit. I'm actually using I think they use 36 grit. That's a Durablock. If you see the little beveled edge in there, that's about the same bevel as the routed edge that I made. So Durablocks are great. You know, they're not just great for block sand and flat surfaces, but curves and all that other stuff, because they have unique shapes on the block, so you can use different sides of it to do different uniform type of sanding. So I'm using that long hard Durablock for that concave part of it for the routed edges, so I don't get any bows or dips if I was going to straight out do it by hand. And it kind of protects your hand too. Even though I did route or cut it, you can still get a splint, like just a small sliver of it kind of coming away. And if you ever sanded an edge like that bare with just by your hand with hand and paper, and you ever got a sliver stuck into the side of your hand, oh that's one fucking hell of a splinter. You might as well just get stabbed by a knife. That's what it feels like. Here I'm also hitting the corners with the same beveled edge, you know, really just rounding as much as I could, except for really the back of the table. The back of the table is, you know, is basically up against the wall side, but I'm kind of hitting it anyway, so I don't get, you know, any slivers of the wood splitting. You know, just kind of smooth it a little bit, but mainly on the edges, on the sides, on the top of it, and on the underneath it. Just, you know, just rounding it as smooth as possible. And then of course, you know, since I've been moving the thing around, just take orbital palm sander, just clean it up a little bit, especially on that back edge, kind of dull it a little bit so it's not as sharp. You know, hit the surface. And here I'm also using 80 grit, which is fine because it's going to get covered in an epoxy primer, a thick coat of epoxy primer, and then a thick coat of, you know, the acrylic pour. So there's going to be a lot of coverage over it. So I try to get it best I can as far as imperfections, but you know, it'll be all right. Now it's time to spread some Bondo. Little thing I did with my Bondo is here. This Bondo I've had for like a couple years. If you have like Bondo that's kind of a little bit old and it's thickened up, add some acetone to it and mix it around pretty good, and it'll revive it. Or if you want the consistency a little bit more thinner to fill in a little bit better, add some acetone and thin it out even some more. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix it up here on the table. I'm just going to spread it over the whole thing. This project was going so good without one of these. Well, can't believe this show unless I have one of these. Alright. God damn it. Fucking bullshit. Stupid fucking time lapse. Fuck out of here. And now I sand. Wait a minute, what the f***? We just did this shit. Why are we doing this again? Why are you gonna see this again? Huh? Why am I about to have an aneurysm? Why are there dogs running around everywhere? And they're different dogs. And why is the color changing too? Look, it's a nice warm color, and then it'll turn blue, and then, yeah, see, look at that. What the hell is doing that? Hey, look, whoa, it got really blue. I don't know why it's doing that. If you can tell me, fine. Well, there's not really too much to describe here. It's sanded Bondo. Sanded down Bondo. And dusting down Bondo. And sanding more Bondo. More sanding of the Bondo. And dogs going by. And sanding more Bondo. And dusting off the Bondo. And making my garage shop filthy full of dust. Hey, look, I think I had to add more. No. Just sanding Bondo. Top sanded, it's pretty smooth. I would even say it would be okay for the next step, but I probably will do a little bit more. I'm not sure yet. I am going to put some more Bondo on the edges, and I'm going to fix these up as well. And so that's the next step. I'm going to mix up some Bondo and get on this part, let it dry. Probably let it dry overnight, and do it the next day. Well, it's been 24 hours since I sanded and Bondoed my pieces. Here's how the actual desktop is looking. I needed to do a little bit more on one of these pieces. Let me see if it's this one. Oh yeah. I needed to add it a little bit more in the corner, but that's going to take a day to dry. That's a spot putty fill. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to epoxy prime the bottom side so that way it can dry overnight, and then I can flip it over. That piece will be sandable and I can fix that, and then I can spray the other half. So it kind of actually saves me a day, since the bottoms of this is pretty much okay. And of course you're never going to see it, but I'm going to load up the bottom with some of this epoxy primer. Just got to finish mixing it up. I'm going to spray it on and we're going to shoot some pieces. Well, I made a boo-boo. I forgot to show you me spraying it. Well, it's no big deal. Anyways, it's only the backside. I promise I'll spray the top where it's actually the most important part, and you'll get to see how I do it and what I use. But the bottom pieces are done. Just let that dry overnight. Like I said, fix that one piece that has the little extra filler, sand it down, and one more little fine little sanding. I think I'll take it. What I've actually sanded these things down to, in case you want to know, was 80 grit, knowing that I'm going to be layering this stuff in epoxy primer, and it'll give it a little bit of something to grab to on the bottom. But as far as the top, I think I'm going to do, I'll probably do either 120, maybe 320. I don't know. 120 should be fine. I'll just take a look on how this dries. It's got a little bit of a texture on it, because I really didn't bother reducing this much to make it flow thinner, because like I said, it's the bottom, and at least this way it'll give it some strength, and it'll actually kind of dry it a little quicker, in theory. Usually it does for me. If I use less reducer, the quicker it and harder it sets up. So we meet again, Fräulein. We are going to actually paint. I fixed it. Kind of did a quick little reroute just to clean it up. I'm going to blow all this stuff off, mix up some paint, and I'm going to spray and some epoxy on it. Checked out what I've already did from last night. It's still curing, a little bit soft still, but yeah, it takes a couple days for epoxy primer, the good stuff, to actually fully cure. So I'm going to mix them up off camera, and we're going to do a little bit of painting. Alright, I got paint loaded in my gun. I just got to get it dialed in a little bit. Time to start spraying some epoxy primer. Epoxy primer is kind of a little bit thick. It doesn't lay down that well, even though I did thin it out to actually kind of lay down a little bit better, but it still ripples. But in this case, I am not going to worry about it, because I am going to sand it down. I am putting it on heavy though. My technique right now is primarily first just get the edges best I can. But as you see right there, in the closest corner, I made a little light spot, and I'm sure I'm going to forget it. And a little tip, when you're spraying, you want to go half and half overlap. As you can see, that's what I'm doing right there. With my fan, I'm going halfway across it from what I sprayed before, back and forth, even distance as much as possible. And if not much of you are used to using spray guns like that, you know, the first part, when you pull back the trigger, the first part when you feel resistance, it will only let air out. Pull back a little more, it'll be air and paint. You always want to let air come out first and then pull back, because sometimes paint builds up inside of the chamber right before the tip, and if you don't, you'll splot some paint on whatever you're doing. In this case, it doesn't matter. This is just a primer. Primer's no big deal. And here we go again with the weird color change on my camera. I do not know why. I'm gonna have to research that. Why it goes from a warm color to a cool blue hue. Don't understand it. But anyways, back to the paint. Hey look, color changing again. Flip around so I can get the edges on that piece. Like I said, I'm sure I'm gonna forget that one that's right closest to us. Bugging me right now. It's like, how come I notice it now watching this and not before? Maybe at some point I paint it over again, but not a big deal, only because there's so much paint on this thing. I guess the only point why I wanted epoxy sealed anyways is just because this desk is, I just want to have a wood core and just, you know, sealed as much as possible. Plus, I get my hands on some pretty gnarly stuff too. You know, it kind of happens when you're kind of working in the business, so, you know, a little bit harder for, you know, for anyone else, I guess, who doesn't have access. This kind of stuff you may just have to use just a regular Home Depot primer, which is not a big deal. Hey, it's getting warm again. What the love spraying, man. Pretty awesome. Sure you clean off, pull off your parts so there's no dust from sitting anywhere else. Good to have. Put your edges. Like color, you know, you want to remember as being kids or even as adults. You know, when you're coloring in the coloring book, you know, you should always, you know, trace the line first and then fill in. It's kind of the same thing. Do your edges and fill in. Obviously, it's kind of hard to get the back edge over there, so. What do you do? Flip it. Well, you still have a dry side. It's kind of hard to do after you did the whole thing. Seal your edge. Not gonna lie, this is my favorite part of all kinds of builds, doing paint. That's why I do it professionally. I get tired of doing this stuff. And the gun I'm using, by the way, is one of those Harbor Freight cheapies. That gun, the tip is like a 2.0 millimeter. You want to be in the 2.0 millimeter ranges when it comes to like thick paints and primers. Your basic paints, you want to be like 1.5, somewhere in the middle, between 1 and 2. And if you're doing clears or very thin paints, you want to be around 1.0 millimeters. Of course, airbrushes go a little bit lower than a millimeter. But primers, you know, you want a big tip. And as far as that gun, that's fine, because to me it's like a throwaway gun and I'm using an epoxy primer. But if you clean your guns out and take care of them, you know, those cheapy guns will actually work and last a while. Blow off, you know, your part again, and then you lose dust. Question why the camera's color is changing on you. Motherfucker. Paint your edges. Why can't it stay like that? Ah, crap, it's turning. That's gonna annoy the piss out of me. Why is it changing color? In case you wonder what camera I'm using a GoPro Hero 9 to film these videos. Probably a setting that I know I have on, but it's really weird why it's so stationary and it's just constantly changing. I'm gonna have to look that up. That is just goofy. And it's only in this build series I'm seeing my camera resolution do this. Well, again, like you see, overlap. It'll be smooth. I also have my paint flow setting, to dump out, pretty heavy. Because it is a lot of paint I'm trying to put on, and it is kind of somewhat a little bit thick. Epoxy Prime doesn't really want to flatten out that great. Sometimes it also depends on the manufacturer of the paint. This one is from a brand known as Cardinal. It's what we typically use in my place of business. It's a good product, rock hard solid. We also use Sherwin-Williams, and they have an epoxy primer. I would prefer to use the Sherwin-Williams version, but we use that a lot. This batch here that I got was used as kind of a test and for something else, but we never really used it, so I was allowed to take it home. One thing I did learn about this primer though, compared to the Sherwin-Williams, the Sherwin-Williams cure time is only like 2 days. This one, after 2 days, I checked it and wondered why it wasn't cure, and I re-looked at the can. Oh, it takes 7 days to full cure. It's a good thing you don't really use it at my work. It'll take forever to get stuff out. This project here was a good testing for this epoxy primer, because I would recommend not using it at my work just because on the lengthy cure time. But pretty much this is going to seal the wood as a core. Lay on that paint. Be patient with your spraying.